Welcome to our lesson on getting to know databases. In this lesson, we're going to look at Microsoft Access as well as OpenOffice Base. Let's start by looking at the workspace. Firstly, I'm going to open Microsoft Access 2010. As soon as you open the document or the application, you'll see this screen. Here you can select to open one of your databases, or you could create a new one based on a template. Note the right-hand side of your screen. Access is slightly different to other applications because here it will ask you to specify where you're going to save your database before you actually start with the work. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll have to specify the file name, and if you select the yellow folder over here, it will open up Windows Explorer and it will ask you where to save the database. We're going to open a database that was created earlier, so I'm going to select Open, and then I'm going to go look for my database. Right, this one is called My Contacts. Open it up. If you see a security warning on your screen, just enable the content. That's just because sometimes databases can contain malicious software, so be careful when downloading databases. Let's have a look at our screen. Right at the top, we've got the title bar. That contains the name of the database that you're working on currently. Then we have our ribbon tabs and our main ribbon areas that are split into different groups like Views, Clipboard, and Sort and Filter. On the left-hand side of your screen, you've got the navigation pane where you will have access to all the objects in your database. Always make sure that you select all access objects, or you might not be able to see everything that's included in your database. Let's have a quick look at some of these objects. Firstly, we have a table. I'm going to open that up. The table is the main part of your database. Without a table, you don't have a database. Each table consists of a number of records, and it also consists of a number of field names going across. The second object we're going to look at is the query. Now, a query is a question that you pose to your database. If you want to find or extract information from your database, the query is what you're going to use. I'm going to open up this particular query, and I'm going to go to the design view so you can just have a quick look at this. In this particular query, we asked to see all the email addresses that have the words "a company" in that particular email address. The information is then extracted from the database table for you to view. The next object we're going to look at is the form. A form will only display one record at a time. It's really just another way of viewing your database table. It's important to note, though, that whatever you do in your form will be reflected in your table as well. Let's look at the example. Here we've got a form that we could use to enter information into our database. You can also edit the information, delete records, as well as extract or filter some information using the form as well. The last object we're going to look at is called the report. Now, the report is usually used to print out information, to put it into a nice format that can be printed as a hard copy. Let's look at the example in this database. So this report shows the name, surname, mobile number, email address, birthday, social networks, etc. All the information that was contained in the database table. You don't have to show all the information, however. When you set up your report, you can choose what information to display, and you can even do some calculations in a report as well. This will be discussed in a lesson later on. Also note that the date and the time is inserted automatically. That's built into the report function, but if you don't want to use it, you can delete it if you want to. We've now looked at the various objects. Let's go back to the table object and look at it in more detail. I'm going to open it up, and then I'm going to go to the design view of the table. To do this, I'm going to go to the top left corner and select Design. Here you'll see all the fields or all the field names that we saw in the datasheet view. These were the column headings in the previous view. So here's where you would set up all the different fields that you want to add to your database. Each field will have a field name as well as a specific data type. Let's have a look at the various data types available. Firstly, we've got the text data type. That's just for normal text. Up to 255 characters can be entered using this particular format. The next data type is memo. This is for longer type of text. If you want to type paragraphs, you can use the memo function, or data type rather. Number would be used for entering numerical values. Date and time for entering dates or times, for instance, a date of birth. Currency, that will obviously change it into currency. Just make sure that your settings are correct and that you're using the correct currency format for your country. Auto number, this will allow the computer to automatically number the records for you, so you don't need to put in the data. The yes/no data type will change the field into a little tick box, which you can either tick or not tick for yes or no. OLE object, this will allow you to insert a picture into your database. A hyperlink will create a hyperlink to something like an email address or a web address. You can also add an attachment or insert an attachment as a field. And then this is something new in Office 2010 called calculated. Here you can actually save a function in your field. And the last one is a lookup wizard. This will allow you to create a drop-down menu where the user can then select an option. Once you've selected the correct data type for each field, you can also change the field properties of these data types. So if I were to click on name, those field properties will appear at the bottom of your screen. Note that if I click on surname, the field properties seem to be exactly the same, but it is for the surname field only. So don't get confused. Make sure that you've selected the correct field before changing the properties. Let's have a look at some of these properties. Firstly, you can change the field size. So for instance, for text, we've got 255 characters. Now most people only have surnames with 5 to 15 characters, so you could actually change that field size to make it a bit smaller. You can also change the format. An input mask could be inserted to guide the user as to what kind of information should be inserted in that particular cell. A default value can be allocated. This is quite useful if you're entering lots of data. For instance, if you're at a boys' school, the default value for gender, for instance, would be male. So you would put that in, but also remember that a default value can be changed. But it's nice to put it in there so you don't have to keep on retyping it. You can also set a validation rule, and this is where you can validate the information that's been entered into your database. For instance, once again, with gender, for instance, you could say you can only type in M or F. That will restrict the user to only typing in those characters. That obviously helps to ensure that people aren't typing in garbage information into your database. Together with the validation rule, you can add some text, so that's a message that you'll give them to help them enforce the rule that you've set in the validation rule. You can also make a field a required field or a compulsory field. So that means that they won't be able to move on to the next field until they've entered data into that particular field. For instance, an ID number, if it is required, then you make it a required field and they'll have to fill in the field before moving on. In your field properties, you can also change the text alignment if you wanted to. And that's just really for the database designer. It's just an aesthetic thing as to where you would like to align your specific field. We've now looked at how to change the field properties for a text data field. Let's quickly go to the currency donation amount field name. Here you'll see some other field properties that are available, such as the decimal places. So here you'll be able to select how many decimal places you would like to display on your screen. We're now going to move over to OpenOffice Base. Let's open the application. When you open the application, the database wizard appears, and it has a similar menu to the Office 2010 version. Firstly, you can choose to create a new database, open an existing file, or connect to an existing file. This is quite a nice feature because you can connect to an Access database, for instance. We're going to open an existing file. Right, so I'm going to select Open to open up my File Explorer or Windows Explorer. My file is allocated on the desktop. And let's open it up. Right, the main difference between OpenOffice and Access 2010 is that Access has a ribbon. In OpenOffice, you've got the menu bar at the top, which are words, and then you've got your toolbars available to you that have little pictures or commands that you can use. On the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see all the objects, tables, queries, forms, and reports. In the center section, it will show you the different tasks that you are allowed to perform on that specific object. And then in the middle of your screen, it will list all the objects available. So here it shows the forms, for instance. There are some other differences in OpenOffice that can be an issue. For instance, if you wanted to create a drop-down list, you would need to do that in your form and not in your actual table. The same with an OLE object. If you wanted to insert an OLE object, you would have to do that at form level and not in the table itself. But we'll look at this in later lessons. That concludes our lesson on getting to know databases.